Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's Impact interview. My name is Aline Tang, Assistant Content Analyst at Leader Associates. This interview is a digital part of ASEAN's largest onshore and offshore wind energy event, ASEAN Wind Energy 2023, which will take place on October the 30th and 31st at the Adore Center in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. AWE brings together international and local players to help ASEAN develop an entire supply chain for the wind industry. And our main character today is Orisun Invest. Orisun Invest is a business platform specializing in the origination of renewable energy projects, with a particular focus on wind and solar assets. It has generated more than 630 megawatts in nearly 8 countries and has succeeded in establishing business partnerships with leading companies such as Total Eren, AMEA Power, and Total Energies. So today, we are more than honored to speak with Mr. Karim Megherbi, Founding Executive Director of Orisun Invest. Welcome, Mr. Karim. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you for the keen introduction.
So to begin with, I would like to hear about your general perspective on the ASEAN market. Like, how would you assess the current state of the wind energy market in ASEAN, especially its key market in Vietnam?
Well, thank you. Thank you for the question. So, well, indeed, we're quite active actually in Asia, but we have mostly closed solar projects actually in the past years. We're mostly involved in Central Asia for wind, and we are looking different projects in India also of wind projects. A very large portfolio actually of several hundreds of megawatts. Now in Southeast Asia, you do have a lot of potential. The wind resources are very good depending on the country, but you do have extremely high potential. Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam, and so on are very interesting countries. Even Cambodia, actually, you do have wind projects there. Now the question is more about, so you do have the resource, you do have also a strong interest to do wind, and especially offshore wind, by the way, because you have some constraint on the land, and so you may have some difficulties to implement large onshore projects. Also, you do have projects like that in development. But still, offshore is very, it's kind of attractive for these countries. But that being said, you definitely need the proper regulatory framework, because these projects, especially offshore, we're talking about gigawatts, and we're talking about billions of dollars of investment. So it's a bit different from a solar project, which is 20 or 30 megawatts that you can, develop here and there, and structure the financing in a way that, okay, there are some difficulties, but if I get these guarantees, etc., I can manage that. For offshore wind, it's a completely different story. Just the development itself costs millions of dollars. You do have to, wind met mass offshore, studies and so on. So it's very costly. The development is very costly, number one. And number two, the financing itself, the investment, is very large. And so you have to provide a full package in terms of guarantees and in terms of PPA, bankable PPAs. And that is the point where today you do have some constraints, especially in Vietnam. You have a lot of projects which have been under development in Vietnam, but with the current PPA, the previous PPA, that's absolutely impossible actually to structure financing for these projects. So different developers have been discussing in bilateral negotiation with the government, not only about the price, but also about the guarantees in terms of sovereign guarantees. So you have, for example, 2 main contracts, which is the PPA, which is to be signed with the utility, and you have the, I would say sovereign guarantee, but it can take different form, a project support agreement, an implementation agreement, a concession agreement, or whatever you call it. And there are different layers of guarantees that can be associated to these contracts. So that has been discussed actually in Vietnam and in different countries. And that is where today you have this constraint. So you have an appetite from the developers. You have countries which are looking for power and which are interested in these technologies. But so far, the contractual framework is not yet there. So there's kind of bottleneck here at this stage.
Thank you for your answer. And the Vietnam wind energy market has really attracted tons of attention and market players' interest. So let's take a closer look at it. I'm quite curious, what is your evaluation of the policy and regulatory framework in the Vietnam wind market? Do you believe the current policies are favorable for investors?
Okay. Okay, so well, thank you very much for this question. So there are different answers for that, depending on the time when you actually enter this question. At first, you know, when the wind and solar markets started in Vietnam a few years ago, everybody was very doubtful about the potential success to develop large-scale projects in large capacities. And why? It's because the regulatory framework was there, but the PP and the contractual framework was very difficult. Although it was in US dollar, it was dollar indexed. So there was no currency risk. The framework of the PPA, the legal clauses were very difficult. And there are few clauses, in particular the take or pay clause, that was extremely difficult to address because there was some loopholes in the way it is constructed. So there was a possibility for EVN to actually not pay the electricity for technical reason on the grid. And there was no cap on the number of hours it's allowed to do so, meaning that you can be curtailed, 100%, in 1 year if there is need, if needs be. So everybody was doubtful that, you can't do project financing. And in a sense, it was correct because international banks refused to finance the renewable energy sector at first, refused in a sense that they could not address the risk of the PPA. And so international financing was not there. However, you had several developers which were able actually to structure financing in different ways. Number one was a corporate, guarantee. So that was for local developers. Number two, you had international developers, mainly from Thailand, Philippines, and China. And they brought their own banks for the financing. And these banks, they accepted the risk on the PPA. And why? It's because they somehow bet on the country, bet on Vietnam, which was a correct bet, by the way. If you look at the economic growth of the country and the, transformation of the country, which is very strong, actually. There are strong, solid numbers and solid reasons why this country is growing. So it's one of the few countries actually with a double-digit economic growth in the region. So you had these projects, actually very large projects, very, very strong development of wind and solar at the beginning. And you had gigawatt, projects being installed. So in a sense, it was a very, successful story. But this money actually came to an end because you don't have infinite money like that. You need to provide proper structured financing, non-recourse financing. And for that, you need to have a bankable PPA, and you need to have, some clarity about what's going to happen in the coming years. But there are a few things that, challenge that. Number one is the curtailment. Well, that happened. So you had 30%, 40%, 60% of curtailment for some projects. But that's obviously a disaster. It's very complicated, situation for some of the developers. Number one, but that can be solved through, investment in the grid, and EVN and the country has completely understood that. And large investments were made, and, clearly this bottleneck will be solved. But number two, you had the price also of the electricity, the price of the PPA. Obviously, when you structure the market, your PPA has to decrease. If not, it doesn't make any sense, right? And so that discussion has been around, structure bankability of the PPA to attract project financing, price of wind and solar. It has been discussed for the past 2 years. And that has been, that has slowed down, from, a lot of gigawatts to zero. So today, is the regulatory framework attractive? Well, it's not frozen yet, it's not settled. So we need to, wait for the final framework to be agreed and to be published. So there's a lot of hundreds of megawatts which are waiting, in the queue somehow, very nice projects, and they're ready to go. But now we're waiting for the proper regulatory framework. That's for onshore wind. You have two ways. Either you will have a PPA with off-takers, and you are allowed to connect somewhere in the grid where you have developed your project, but your off-takers, which will be somewhere else, that's going to be kind of auction system, and you have, if I remember correctly, at least 1 gigawatt or something like that, a plan, and then people are waiting for the feed-in tariff. And it's not yet clear actually where it's going. So the country has solved previous projects, the ones which were stuck in the construction or ready to build, and they have invested already a lot of money, and they were stuck because somehow the feed-in tariff disappeared. So that has been solved as far as I know. Tariff is quite low for these previous projects. So in a sense that for new projects, if you know the tariff, then you can manage your development cost and so on, address the loan cost, etc. So you know that, okay, I need this specific return, so my cost should be not above that. But when before you had the information that your tariff should be that high, so you structure your cost in a way that, okay, that's going to be absorbed, but now your tariff decreased by 20%, then these projects, although now they have the view, they know their future, because now they can either finish the construction, etc., or start the construction or finish the construction. That's a bit complicated. Some of these projects, we've been looking at them actually at Orisun, but some of these projects are still in an economic, situation which is difficult. So my answer to that is the regulatory framework which will happen which will come in Vietnam will definitely, I think, will be attractive for sure, because the country needs energy and because renewable energy has proven their value for the country, especially compared to other alternatives. Now, when it's going to come and for how long, etc., that's exactly what everybody is waiting for.
Okay, thank you. And regarding project development, what do you envision are the preferences and priorities of the Vietnam wind market? And from Orisun's view, which types of wind energy projects would you prioritize and choose for your clients?
Yeah, well, what at Orisun, our approach is that we look at renewable energy from different angles, at least 3 angles. One is from the perspective of our net zero scenarios. So we're aware of, how many gigawatts, what's the dynamic of the renewable energy, and per year, should be developed, and how to replace fossil fuel, etc. So, which countries are, very key actually in terms of emissions, etc. So we're looking at that and trying to, be in line with net zero scenarios. That's number one. Number two, we work with investors, and so they do have, their appetite. So we're looking for projects which fit to their criteria. And number three, we have connections with developers, and so they have their own projects, and we work with not necessarily, either big or small, depends, but people that we trust are doing a great job. And so we trust their development, project development will be done, at the, very, that's the state of the art, following the state of the art. And therefore we will limit the risk during the due diligence and during the financing. So in a sense, we're trying to get this project on the ground and bring them, and bring investors for them. Either it's co-development or it's a straight sale at COD. So we're looking at, projects from these three angles. So now in Vietnam, there are a few things. One is, well, you have the wind, so there are onshore and offshore, okay? So on onshore, we're trying to look at regions where you have less curtailment potential, where you have less projects actually, so that you can more easily, connect them and have, less competition also in the coming auctions, if it's an auction, which will come. So that's number one. You do have such projects in several hundreds of megawatts. So we're looking at them. Number two, you have projects which are already in operation that you can buy also, but premiums are sometimes high. Also, there was the issue of the curtailment and so on. So, there was a big M&A period actually in the past years in Vietnam where premiums were very high, probably too high. So it was difficult to acquire these projects. So, investors were kind of on standby and trying to see how it will evolve and how the premium and the returns will evolve favorably, So now with inflation, etc., you really need to have, premiums going lower because honestly, the returns expected from investors are, impacted by the inflation, etc. So that's number two. And then for the offshore wind, which I believe it's a very, good opportunity. But then here we're not very much involved because it's more about large players and, some projects, here and there. And so for us as originators, people are already structured somehow from day one with investors, with developers, and agreements have been already signed between them. And so it's a kind of consortium which is already there and which is pushing the government to, actually negotiating with the government, it's more appropriate, the proper PPA and, bankable framework and so on. So I know many wind associations like D-Wave have been very much involved in discussing this framework, and show different options for the government, etc. The government knows very well what they're doing, obviously. So, well, here, that's very interesting. Offshore wind is very interesting. They've been consortium developing project for quite some time now, several years, without having any kind of, signal so far that is the situation will evolve. So in a sense that if you are a late player, it's better. You have less development costs occurred. But so it's interesting, but that's not really today where we are. We're more on onshore wind and solar.
Okay, thank you. And I believe the next question would also be of the investor's interest. In terms of project financing, like what challenges do you anticipate investors encountering in Vietnam? And what would be Orisun solutions to address these challenges and ensure successful transactions?
Well, actually, we've been working a lot actually on this issue because that's what from day one, the constraint that we have identified that, availability of non-recourse financing would be an issue for investors, obviously. So we barely work with investors that are happy to provide a corporate guarantee to secure, their loan 100% basis, So local developers, they had their home or, buildings put as an escrow account or whatever, as a guarantee, to support. So we don't work with such investors. I mean, we can, but it's just happened that our investors are mostly large or mid-sized power, developers, which their DNA is really power and renewable energy. So, they barely do that, this kind of corporate guarantees. Well, they can provide some guarantees, but 100% of the loan is difficult. So that's from day one we've been working on that. So what we saw is the following. Number one is you do have non-recourse financing in Vietnam. Regardless of the PPA, there is non-recourse financing. And so how do you get this non-recourse financing? It's mostly about relationship with banks, and so you need to work with local players, number one. local players who have strong relationship with the banks. They have this corporate relationship, and so they know each other for long time. They know their business, how they work, and so on. And so they get access, to non-recourse financing. So my suggestion from day one was to work with local players and share the stakes, in the project. So our investors, they want to be majority. So depend what we have structured was a very large investment fund. We discussed that, but unfortunately we could not find so far one transaction actually to implement the framework. But it was a 50-50, share in the SPV, and so you got access to non-recourse financing. That was, 2 years ago. Now, players have been able to structure in some ways non-recourse financing, whereas from some banks from Asia, so there are some options to do non-recourse financing, but now what everybody is waiting for is the final regulatory framework. So without this framework, obviously, you don't know exactly how to structure the transaction. So people are waiting for that, but you have the possibility to provide non-recourse financing in the previous framework, and hopefully the new framework will be improved. And so I hope that access to non-recourse financing will be easier, and that we can unlock the financing, especially from development financial institutions like Asian Development Bank, IFC, FMO, DG, and so on. So they are all involved in Vietnam. They have been discussing with local banks for many years now. I mean, for the past years, 2, 3, 4 years. So everybody's ready, actually. And if the proper regulatory framework comes, play, then you will have billions of financing certainly pouring in the country.
Okay, thank you so much for your detailed answer. And to wrap up today's interview, I would like to ask one more question about the future market. Looking ahead, what are your predictions for the development of the Vietnam wind market over the next 5 to 10 years? And what role will Orisun play in related market activities? And how would Orisun help, let's say, how would it help lubricate the market?
Well, so it's very clear that Vietnam, there is, they see a strong economic growth. I don't think it will completely stop, I mean, you do have, crises and so on, so you cannot predict, the future. But, Vietnam is a country where a lot of investments are coming, and so FDI are coming. So in a sense, it's a country which will require a lot of energy in the coming years, for sure. Number two, if this energy, if they want to decarbonize it and also not relying on, fossil fuel, especially coal, you do have, gas, which is coming in the country, LNG, but that's, when you see price of solar, wind, and so on, for sure, renewable energy, if, addressed properly in the mix, will play a very strong role in stabilizing the energy prices in the country and make the energy system much more reliant. So I would, resilient, sorry. So I would imagine that, the government has completely understood that, especially with the crisis in Russia and Ukraine. I think the whole Asia have seen, saw their prices of fuel, etc., going up, and people were very concerned about and realized the dependency that we have from fossil fuel, and energy security is not something, it's not a given. So everybody now understand that it's better to rely on their own resources, which is wind and solar. Basically you have the sun and you have the wind and geothermal and biomass and things like that. So I expect many projects in many countries which were stuck somehow in this system in developing renewable energy to grow again, and Vietnam is one of them. where not only they have to, address that in the electricity system, but they need also to electrify. Either it's going to be electrical vehicle, either it's going to be their industries and so on. So you can imagine that the challenge, it's not only the power system, which is today, but it's somehow double the size, because then with electrification, it's much more. So all that leads to gigawatts of renewable energy that are required in the coming years. So what is going to be the dynamic? That I don't know. I cannot, say that, oh, it's going to be 5 gigawatt per year, etc. You do have some projections, etc. But, at the end of the day, you need to see the incentives and the main dynamic behind that. So what you rational behind that. So the rationals are there. And so the market will be there. How we're going to support it? Well, I guess you have a lot of developers in Vietnam, which are doing a great job. But at the end of the day, they need to also address issues with investors, find the right way to, the common language, to discuss about returns, about premiums. They need also, investors need to understand also the risk in the country, the culture and how to work there. So we hope to assist both developers and investors in finding their, common ground and, sign agreements together, either for co-development activities, meaning that you have developers who have secured the land, or who are, organizing themselves to bid for the coming tenders, etc., or who will win the tenders, and then after that they need to develop. So we'll be happy to assist developers and assist investors to come in this country to secure, their agreements with such developers.
Okay, thank you so much for your answer. And throughout the interview, it's absolutely good to know that there are so many opportunities and probably challenges that may turn into great chances in this market. And we also learned so much about Orisun's ambitions. We look forward to what you can gain from as well as offer to this market. Thank you, Mr. Karim, for taking the time and for generously sharing with us your knowledge and expertise regarding the ASEAN and Vietnam market. We're honored to have you join us, and we eagerly anticipate your presence at the Asian Wind Market 2023 in Vietnam. Thank you.